finally came up with an agreement, and they didn't tell Czechoslovakia. Britain and France both vowed to defend. They had a treaty with a democratic republic the Czechs had made. And so they said, we'll give you this state one. Hitler was disappointed. He wanted war. But Chamberlain gave him a piece of paper, and on it said, agree that basically this is the last time, or the last territory I'm going to demand. Hitler agreed no more. And Chamberlain asked him to sign it, and Hitler signed the paper. And do you think Hitler meant it? No, he was like, sure, whatever. Give me, I don't care, I'll sign it. I'll sign anything. Doesn't matter. My word means nothing. I get what I want. And so Hitler actually was furious there wasn't war. But Chamberlain then went back. By the way, the Czechs were absolutely furious, and they realized they're all alone. Oh, wait, I'm all messed up. Am I wait for that? Used to. Used to. That's my tiger.
The last time you pressed it, it went off like 3 times on its own.
I know, it's kind of short. Yeah, I used to go. So they agreed to sign this paper. And here's the thing. When the French premier, Daladier, went back to Paris, he thought people would want to lynch him. He really thought everybody understood we're giving in to Germany and they're going to take everything. And so we went back to Paris, he was furious. And instead, he was met by thousands of Parisians, overjoyed that they avoided war. Hey, they all remember World War I. That was 20 years ago. They remember the slaughter. They all know Verdun. For the British, it's the Somme. So they all know. And so when Chamberlain arrived and held that piece of paper when he got off his plane, so with that, actually these don't, this is all flimsy one. I'd be okay. Okay, so he waved that piece of paper and said, we now have peace in our time. And people were overjoyed and they cheered. But what? Hey, I wish you guys luck. It's weird. There must be gravity. Okay, so I thought that was only a theory. And he was overjoyed. And the thing about it is that looking back, I know things shake. So looking back, people look back at this and see what a terrible mistake the appeasing of Hitler, even though it's probably too late, and giving in right here. But at the time, here's a cartoon of him staring down Mars, the god of war. Him is like a dove of peace. I know that's kind of creepy, but and the man the world looks to. He was seen as a hero, but it would be after the fact. And do get this down. Munich is going to become synonymous with appeasement. And it's going to be used time after time during the Cold War and after. It's going to be used time after time in the Cold War and after to get the Americans involved in all sorts of foreign affairs. In the Cold, you're going to get synonymous with appeasement. And so they'll say, if we don't stop the communists, it'll be just like Munich, and then that's when you know the Soviets will take Wyoming. If we don't stop them, all roads lead to China. I know, that's why we have to fight them. So when most Americans could not have found Korea on a map in 1950, they said, oh, we got to stop North Korea attacking South Korea, because we don't, that's a piece of the communists, and Stalin will take Cheyenne. That is what we got to worry about right here. And Casper. All the Wyomings. No. So with that, but the point is, they use that. We have to get involved in a civil war in South Vietnam. Because if we don't, the communists will be appeased and they won't stop. And you see it after the Cold War ended. For the United States to get involved all over the world. if we don't stop Saddam Hussein from building weapons of mass destruction, we're going to be next. Which, of course, he wasn't building weapons of mass destruction, but that was the reason the United States invaded Iraq in 2003. And all that. And this will be used time after time after time. Here's an example of very recently of, this is comparing with 4 years ago, President Obama's administration made a deal with Iran for them to stop their nuclear program, which they did stop. President Trump has pulled out of this. But it's implying using Chamberlain, getting off the plane, waving that piece of paper of appeasing Iran, so then we're giving in, so they'll secretly be building nuclear weapons. And so it's used to this very day. I heard somebody just 2 weeks ago talk about, if we don't go in and invade Venezuela, we're appeasing them, which is, it was actually kind of funny. So it would be like, she said it would be like another Munich. And so this is some program. But she was asked, well, what happened in Munich? She had no idea. No idea. She just knew, must have been on a piece of paper, say it's like Munich. So you look smart. Yeah.
Isn't this the same argument they used before the Civil War in the South had?
Yeah, or before World War I, Germany to protect their culture. Yeah. So they say we're appeasing them. Munich, we brought up time after time. And so this is implying that there's a lesson you don't give into aggression. Well, you could argue that, but actually the world's really complex. And there could be a lot of different issues involved here. There is a real lesson here to learn from Munich. The really only concrete lesson is, don't make agreements with Adolf Hitler. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a pretty good agreement. He's a psychopath. How do you deal with a psychopath? Well, the other two periods with another psychopath. I thought that was kind of fun. But, yeah, the problem is, if somebody, they all operated, like, Stalin wasn't a psychopath. Stalin had issues, but he was not, I mean, Stalin was a horrible, horrible person. But how do you deal with somebody who, everybody in that room except for Hitler didn't want war? Hitler wanted war, so he didn't care. How do you deal with somebody like that? That's the hard part. And the thing about psychopaths, they don't tell you they're psychopaths. They don't say, hi, nice to meet you, I'm a psychopath. They don't have a tattoo of their forehead, even though that'd be kind of, okay, so with that, this would be a big issue. And what's going to happen? Well, first off, they would take the Sudetenland. Here's a German, ethnic German in the Sudetenland crying. She's overjoyed. I know it looked like she's sad, but she's overjoyed, hailing the German army as they come in to take the Sudetenland. And you know, Sudetenland is free. But as it turned out, you can't trust Hitler. 6 months after this agreement, he took the rest of Czechoslovakia. He took the whole thing. And you might think, why did the Czechs fight? Actually, the Czechs had a strong army, but they felt completely alone now. How can Britain and France just abandon them? And so the poor Czechs, these 6 years of rule by the Germans. And one big thing about this, though, Hitler wanted war. War is coming. And as a preparation for war, there's an event you got to put, it fits in right after Munich, Kristallnacht. So on the night of November 9th and 10th of 1938, Kristallnacht is also known as the Night of Broken Glass. And that's how the Germans make their tens. They always put a hyphen there and numbers like that. So I thought I'd keep it with the original German. That. Huh? Yeah. Glass, Night of the Broken Glass. Night of the Broken Glass. The Night of the Broken Glass. And what they did is, okay, a German diplomat was assassinated in Paris. It's turned up by a young Jewish man in Paris for German actions. They used that as an excuse for they acted like it was just German citizens rising up against Jewish tyranny, but it was organized by the government. They attacked Jewish-owned stores, synagogues, set them on fire, homes, beat up Jews. And so many store windows were broken to the piece of glass there. That's why they call it the Night of Broken Glass. And this was the last effort to force Jews out of Germany before war, to make them leave. Remember, the whole goal was to make them leave. And this is important to think about. So the whole goal was to make them leave because they know once war starts, you can't make them leave. Because you're at war. The borders are shut. You're fighting. And that is the element where you get to the final solution. So that is why when they actually conquered Poland and a big hunk of the Soviet Union, all this area here, that was the largest population of Jews in the world. And they can't make them leave. Remember the horrible logic of total war. You cannot have dissent. And here's an enemy within, which your ideology says is behind every bad thing in the world. Can you allow that enemy within to stay? That's a horrible logic. It's almost like you take the logical logic of total war. And that is when they would at first take the Jews who lived in these areas, and remember, this is the German army, there's nothing they could do, and force them at first, they shot a number of them, force them into, they call them ghettos, but just imagine a walled off area of towns, like a concentration camp. And then starting in 1942, what did they do? Set up the death camps, just making their murder as many as possible. And they saw an efficient way. So that was the horrible logic, how that fits in. And so that was Kristallnacht, the night of broken glass. And here's Hitler looking at some of the glass. I know, but I wanted to show that picture. And they implied, who do they blame it on? Just the presence of the Jews made good German people that angry. And God, it's really shaken up there. These are all the towns where there were attacks, because war is coming. And that's where we get what's the next area Hitler wanted. For the same reason, a German ethnic group, Poland. And now we get to Poland. Remember, Germany was split in two by that war. So just okay. Wow, it's focused right away. Let me get more focus. Good. All right, so this area right here is called the Polish Corridor. There was a big harbor town today. It's called Gdansk because that's in Polish, but then it was Danzig, which is a German town. And what Hitler said is the German population, because this was Germany. This was Germany. About 65 to 70% of the population were Germans. And so what Hitler said is the Polish tyrants were taking away German rights. The ironic thing was this. Poland really was a pretty nasty military dictatorship. Unlike Czechoslovakia. They were a dictatorship. But they said, we're not going to give in. And this time, Britain and France said, we guarantee we will defend Poland. Now remember, they said it for Czechoslovakia too. And Hitler didn't believe them. But it's important to know, they guarantee Poland. So Poland would be the trigger of World War II in many ways. And so what's going to happen to Poland after the war is going to be so big in the events that led up to the Cold War about what's going to happen to Poland. But back to this. So Poland, or Britain and France guaranteed. Hitler didn't believe him, and you can imagine. But Hitler was worried. Remember World War I? Germany had to fight a two-front war, here and here. And to a lot of Germans, they figured that's why we lost. The German army was about 1.5 million men. It's still relatively small. And yeah, they can get a little bit bigger. And that's with reserves. They can get bigger, but it's going to take a while. The generals said, we'll be ready for full-scale war. They wanted war with the Soviets. And we'll be ready in 1945. What's ironic about that? Yeah, the war ended. So that gives you an idea how the Germans weren't ready. To give you an idea how ill-prepared the Germans were, 90% of their transport for like supplies or artillery, still horse. And they'd be that way for the whole war. They didn't have that many trucks. Yeah, they had a number of tanks, but not a significant amount. Their tanks weren't very good. Most of their men were still marching. It wasn't a heck of a lot different than World War I. They did have some pretty good planes, but they had pretty small bombers, so they couldn't carry a big load, and their fighter planes were good, but had a really short range. Nazi propaganda made it seem like they had this incredible army. They really didn't have it. In fact, the generals were furious. And for 39 and 40, that's as close as they would come to having a coup in overthrowing him. It went all the way up to the head of the German army, thinking about, we might have to get rid of him. They wanted war, but they wanted war when they're ready. So don't think, oh, they'll overthrow them and bring democracy and freedom. I'm sorry, it didn't quite work that way. But back to this then. Britain and France, they too realized, geez, if Germany is strong, we better get the Soviets. But they hate Stalin. They hate communism. And what did Stalin just do? What is it called where Hitler got rid of the brown shirts, the SA? What did they call that? The knife. Long knives. And Stalin copied that a few years later. What do they call it in the Soviet Union? I know we got so many of these. Do you remember this? Stalin just had the purges. In the purges, where they got rid of almost all of what?
We just talked about our purge in English.
Oh, you did? In the Soviet Union?
No, there's a movie. And it's about they like killing the crowds.
Okay, so the thing what happened was this. And what they did, he had almost all the leading communists killed, and 60% of the officers in the Red Army Stalin had killed, including the head of the army, Tukhachevsky, had them all killed. And so what happened with that is the Soviets actually had a really powerful army, but without those officers, Stalin's like, I'm not ready to fight. And he began to think, okay, maybe we should ally with them against Germany. Because remember the fascists, their big thing was their enemies communists. By the way, that's how Stalin kept power. Stalin said, if I go out of power, the fascists will come in. They're mortal enemies, Germany and Russia. So they looked here. The problem is they were reluctant until it was too late. And they finally sent diplomats to organize a peace agreement with Stalin. But they sent them by boat. And it took them a week and a half. And Stalin was furious. The Germans are sitting there thinking, you know, we can make friends with Stalin, at least for a while, and avoid a two-front war. And they flew their foreign minister, von Ribbentrop, by plane. And you think, what's the big deal? Huh? Yeah, Stalin read a lot into that. It's the image. The Germans mean it. They're faster. And this is going to lead to, you see called the Russo-German, all kinds of names, the Nazi-Soviet Pact. But I always called it, because this is what my teacher called it, the Hitler-Stalin Pact. Let's write Stalin correctly. I want to write Stain. The Hitler-Stalin Pact. It was a non-aggression pact. They became allies. And it had a couple of different things. First off, in secret, for Poland, they decided we're going to split Poland in two. The Soviets would get the eastern part of Poland. It's just poor Poland. What's going to happen to them in this war? What? Yeah, they would. This would be the fourth partition. But not only that, they also agreed to trade. Germany had technology that the Soviets needed, and the Soviets had raw materials. And what's the raw material? Oil. The Soviets had oil, and you cannot fight a war without oil. Oil. Oil was everything in this war, as it is for the whole century through now. And oil. So, Germany now had a free hand. And that's why, that's right here. September 1st, 1939, Germany attacked Poland. Now, they tried to make it seem like Poland attacked them first, but nobody bought it. Germany attacked. Britain and France did declare war a day later. And so that's why you can say that's why World War II began. When Britain and France declared war, now it's a worldwide war. Here's the thing, though. Germany was low on supplies, and their army was pretty small. They had to win fast. They couldn't get bogged down in a long war. But they had a big advantage. Poland positioned all their army on the frontier. So if you punch through that, there's nothing there. And Germany also had another idea, using basically the tactics they used back in 1918 in the spring offensive that broke through the British lines. They used almost the same tactic, but instead they would do the punching through with, they'd put almost all their tanks in 4 spots and just punch through. And their propaganda would give it a name and make it imply that they figured out a new way to fight, even though it really wasn't that much different. A new way to fight. And it just terrified people that the Germans had figured out something. What did they call it? And that's where you get lightning war or blitzkrieg. Blitzkrieg. Lightning war. And the idea is they could use all their great technology and armored forces and punch a hole. And the way the Poles had organized their army and their pretty repressive dictatorship led to a bad army, they basically just aligned their forces 4 big columns. And they broke through and encircled here and encircled here. And it destroyed the Polish army in 2 weeks. And then as soon as the Polish army was defeated, then the Soviets jump in this way. They waited until the Poles were completely defeated. And Poland, no country would suffer more in Europe than Poland. About 40% of the population would be killed in this war. Almost all the Jews in Poland would die, along with significant people. And the Soviets were also horrific to them too. But Poland fell. Yeah.
So just kind of like a quick question about, so the, like before the war is about getting the Jews, you know, out so they didn't have to go to war. But when they were taking all of these like territories, where did they expect them to like go?
Well, what did they do?
Well, yeah.
They just were going to have to get rid of them. And you read some of the things they were talking about when they took Russia. I mean, the plan was, well, we're probably going to have to starve or kill most of them. Yeah, it's actually scary to read. They talk very openly about that. And so the whole idea was we want to get them out of Germany proper. So we're not weakened to have this enemy within if we go to war. But then we'll still have here. So that's, so almost all the Jews who died in the Holocaust were not from Germany. And so, with that, they felt, yeah.
What is Spain and Italy up to at this point?
Well, Italy is going to sit there and watch, and I'll tell you about Italy in a sec. Mussolini, they're not ready for war at all. Germany wants him to enter, but he's like, no, we're not ready. But then he'll do, of course, because he's Mussolini, he'll do something foolish. Spain stayed neutral. Britain and France did nothing. They did like a shield across the line and then sat there. And they might have had a chance maybe to push into Germany because their entire army was here. But then they didn't do anything for that month. And when Poland fell in a month, for the next 6 months, they both sides basically just sat there and belt up and looked at each other. In fact, it became known as the phony war. Or soon they would call it Blitzkrieg, Sitzkrieg. Get it? Because they're just sitting. Okay, so with that, yeah, I know that it's kind of funny, but not that. But here's the thing. The French have built this incredible fortified line here. What do they call it? It's named after the French their defense minister, the Maginot Line. So it's a man's name. And I had some great spelling of this on the Gathering Storm. I had some wonderful spelling. I don't think it was in this class, but somebody spelled the Maginot Line. They tried to spell it phonetically, and this is what I got. And I thought that was the greatest thing I've ever seen in my life. The Maginot. That is so awesome. But, you know, I mean, we're English speakers, but it's pretty funny. Yeah, okay, it's not like a wall. What it was, or every hilltop, this really rugged area, they put these massive underground fortifications. And then in spots all over, they had cannon and turrets that would pop up and fire over the entire countryside and go back into the mountain. It is one of the most amazing things I've ever seen. I went to one that was right here. And just went in this, it's unreal, going to this underground cement, the base of a mountain. And they have dormitories and mess halls and hospitals, ammunition stored under this mountain to last for months. They have little electric trains that would take you to all different parts of this fortified thing. It's unreal. And it survived. And you can see why they thought, okay, we built this really good defensive line. They learned that from World War I. You attack, you come out in the open, you're slaughtered. And it's a good idea, because by building it here, they know the Germans can't attack here. So where do the Germans have to attack? And so they can meet them there. So they put their best forces and meet them right here. It's a pretty good idea. It makes sense. Now, Belgium would stay neutral, and that kind of hurt the French and British plans. There's only a couple hundred French or British troops, or a really small army, but France has a huge army. They're extremely confident of victory. The German generals are unenthusiastic about this. They're worried about another World War I. They don't want to be defeated. They want to wait. They want to fight the Soviets. And so their plan was a little bit different. I got to draw you the plan. Let's see if you remember this. They're going to mass their troops right here. And then they're going to march through Belgium and sweep around like that. Doesn't that look, do you remember the name? Yeah, they didn't want to come up with a new plan. And Hitler didn't like this plan, but he felt stuck with it, and that's what the general staff wanted. But a Luftwaffe, a German Air Force officer, was flying in a little plane along basically this little stretch right here between two bases, and he had a briefcase with all the German plans in for the attack. He was a courier. It was a stormy January night, 1940. His plane got lost, and so they finally found the runway in the storm and landed right there in Belgium. He got off the plane, and there was the Belgian police to meet him. They arrested him, they took it, and they gave the plans to the French. And now the French know they're going to come right through here. And our plan's ready. The French were extremely confident. They thought for sure we could win this war. And they should have. The French and the British had more men. They had more tanks, and the French had the best tanks. They had more artillery. Air forces were close. The Germans might have a slight advantage, but it's really close. And they had both the French and the British, not even close in Navy. Germans had virtually no Navy. They were extremely confident. But now Hitler, when he heard that that pilot was lost, he accepted a plan, pretty radical plan from a junior officer to do a diversion, then mass the forces here. You notice I didn't draw anything here? This was a forested area called the Ardennes, really rugged, narrow valleys, lots of trees, beautiful area. But it was going to be lightly defended, and the only French soldiers would be second-rate reservists. A lot more veterans of World War I, those poor guys. And mass about 80% of their tanks right here. Bust through the forest, and then here's the best part. Get out in the open and then turn which direction? Yeah. They figured the French would think they'd go to Paris or behind the line. They'd go here and seal off the best troops in the British and French army. It's a good plan. It's risky. It's all or nothing. And you have to rely on really good French roads and then just go. And before we get to that, the Blitzkrieg was broken. Who did Germany attack in April? That kind of all said, ooh, we're back at war of 1940. What two countries? Denmark and Norway. And they had to use their tiny little navy to get Norway. The Royal Navy tried to stop them. And it was kind of a disaster for the British. And because of that, Chamberlain's government fell. And on May 10th, 1940, a guy who was considered a pariah, hated by all the political parties, the Labour, the Liberal, and the Conservative Party. They hated him. But since he predicted the war, he would be made prime minister. Winston Churchill. And the other guy who might have been prime minister, Lord Halifax, actually was a Nazi sympathizer. He tried to be the British ambassador to the United States and did very good. So, well, but Churchill has nothing to do with it. I mean, it just happened to be on the same day Germany attacked France. The Battle of France. And this is the first part of World War I. And the best book I've seen on the Battle of France, because this whole thing just kind of fascinates me how this happened, it's called Strange Victory. And it's so well done because it shouldn't have happened. And France should not have lost, especially the way they did, and it did. So they attacked, the French moved up, everything went exactly the way they thought. There was some pretty hard fighting right here. And it took them 4 days, the French, to realize that the main force was going through the forest. And they punched through the reservists here, turned north, and the French lost them. French military intelligence was slow, they had bad communications, their generals were still fighting the old war, they were in their 70s and were kind of, I hate to say it, but fossils. In fact, French communications were so bad, a tank battle was fought right here in southern Belgium. Over 2,000 tanks, German and French tanks fought, and it was a big French victory. But the French communications were so bad, they thought they lost and pulled back. It's just a tragedy in so many ways. And shocking everybody. In less than 10 days, they got to the coast and cut them off. Hitler said it would work. The generals who were thinking coup, no more. Hitler was right. Any chance to remove Hitler then before it got beyond bad was lost. There would be an attempt to overthrow Hitler in 1944, but the damage had already been done. So they broke through. And Winston Churchill, who made a lot of stupid decisions, did a lot of things that we could argue were not very intelligent, but Winston Churchill for about 4 months was brilliant. And arguably he saved civilization. I kind of believe that. Then after that, he started winning stupid ideas like attacking Yugoslavia, but that's another story. And so Churchill kept telling the French, keep fighting. In fact, talk about unifying the countries together. But he ordered his 200,000 troops. Britain has no army. They virtually have no troops. He ordered them to begin pulling back to the sea. And this is where Hitler is going to make fatal mistake number 1 at a place called Dunkirk. Dunkirk has a couple little piers. It's hardly a harbor at all. It's a beach town right here, Dunkirk. And he started pulling back to one of the few or few harbors they could go to. And the thing about Dunkirk was, when the Germans got here, even though they were exhausted from a week of hard fighting and driving, they were ordered, at first, they were going to turn north and capture the ports. Hitler panicked and thought, it's too easy. We have to solidify our lines. And so he ordered them to stop. And by ordering them to stop, that allowed the British to pull back to the port and the French to protect them. And they would never have pulled out, and Britain would have had no choice but to sue for peace if they would have lost their men. That was one of the big issues. By the way, when the Germans broke through, you can imagine supplies would be a real issue. And the men marching behind. How did they get fuel for their tanks? Their tanks actually used petrol, gasoline engines. What's the problem with that in war? Yeah. Well, how do they get fuel? France has a very modern road network, and you have a modern roads. What do you have every few miles? Gas stations. They just pulled their tanks up and gas and fueled up. Yeah, and didn't pay. So with that, this is when Churchill decided to use every ship they got in the powerful Royal Navy. And they used every civilian boat, every small boat they could get. They used all these civilian boats, even though the crews would be Royal Navy reservists. So they just commandeered them from civilians. And they sailed everything they had across the channel. They were hoping to maybe get 50,000 troops out, but because of Hitler's delay and French forces keeping the Germans out for a week, they pulled out 350,000. 250,000 of them were British. The poor French troops, they all wanted to go back and fight for their country, so they were landed here rather than France surrendered. Those poor guys. But this turned the course of the war. Now Britain could stay in the fight. Yeah, the men didn't even have their rifles, had nothing except themselves, but they had troops. They could stay in the fight. And France was devastated. They lost their best forces. The 2 governments toppled. They replaced a number of generals. Defeatism took over. Morale sank. The whole thing fell apart. And there'll be a couple of days of hard fighting in June, and then in France, it just collapsed. Just gone. And on June 26, 1940, France surrendered. And Hitler was just overjoyed. He spent hell in Belgium fighting with the Germans in World War I, and now they fall in a month and a half. France has never recovered from this. And yes, they blamed the British. And then it was even worse when the British came and were ones who liberated them. That even made it worse. They didn't particularly like the Americans liberating them, but the big deal was the British did it. And they still haven't recovered. There's other things that happened that infuriated the French. So a couple of things we got to get about this. France will be divided in 2. And there'll be a government in France here they call Vichy France. Okay, this is a terrible line. It's actually this area that's colored here. I just have to make it straight because I like things parallel, but that would be they collaborated with the Germans. It was an independent government all the way through the end of 42. They ran the colonies, and even though they weren't directly allied with the Germans, they kind of helped the Germans. And it would be the Vichy government that would begin to round up French Jews when the final solution began. And France, this really was an issue for France after the war. We'll come back to that when we talk about, a little bit about Israel, and it was created in 1948. So when that happened, now Britain is along. And one thing Churchill did, even though by all logic, and Hitler just assumed, they got to quit. They're all alone. They have a tiny army. They can't win. Churchill vowed publicly to stay in the fight, and would not sue for peace. And here's the issue. 19 miles. They could see him, but they couldn't get there. Britain could not cross that channel. Their navy wasn't strong enough. The Royal Navy would fight to the death to keep them off, and they knew that. So they wanted a way to get them to sue for peace. They talked about plans for invasion, but that was never realistic. And the next phase of the war will be called the Battle of Britain. The Germans don't call it that, but everyone else does. And that will go basically from August of 1940 through the end of October of 1940. August through October of 1940. And the plot was, the plan, knock out the RAF. Knock out the Royal Air Force. Royal Air Force was about 2/3 the size of the German Air Force, even though a lot of the Royal Air Force planes were heavy bombers, which would be worthless in this. Knock out the fighters, and so if they got air superiority, there's no way Britain could stand the war. And so they want to destroy as many planes, airfields, and kill as many British pilots as possible. What do we call that when they kill so many they have to quit fighting? This is going to be a big battle of attrition. The problem with the Germans, their bombers were pretty weak and easy to shoot down, and their fighter planes to protect them didn't have the range. And the British had another advantage. Remember I told you the Germans were very anti-technology because they thought that was very Jewish? What technology did the British use in this? Radar. Radar. Whenever the Germans would attack in massive waves, radar would pick them up, and they would always have a few fighter planes there, kind of pick them off, peck off German planes. And so German losses were much higher than they thought. Yet by September, it looked like it might work. And then Hitler would make fatal mistake number 2. One was Dunkirk. 2, kind of a comedy of errors. They had avoided bombing cities at first, avoiding bombing London. The German plane was trying to bomb wharfs near London, got lost in a storm, and so just dropped their bombs right over a residential area of London. Churchill felt it must have a response. So Churchill ordered a small nighttime raid over a residential area in Berlin. This humiliated Hitler, who was getting frustrated with the war of attrition anyways, and he turned to what we call the Blitz. The Blitz was the bombing of whom? Civilians. They thought they could use terror bombing. Remember we talked about this in Total War. Hurt their morale, knock out the factory workers, and get them to try to change their government. And they began to bomb civilians. And the initial shock was huge. 50,000 British civilians are going to die in the next 3 months. They flattened areas. But it didn't at all work the way they thought. The RAF survived. And they lost a lot of bombers. They had to resort to night bombing, and so it wasn't very accurate. But here's the biggie. In Total War, the thought was, we bomb them, and they'll want to overthrow Churchill. Yet the British civilians did not blame Churchill. Who did they blame? The Germans. And what did they want? They didn't want to quit. What do they want? You do that to us, we're going to do that to you 1,000 times over. They wanted revenge. Total War doesn't work the way that they thought. Remember I laid that all out? It doesn't quite work. And what they're going to do to the German cities is going to be unbelievable. And so, It worked. The Battle of Britain was a failure. Britain survived. So therefore, Hitler had no choice but to make fatal decision number 3. At a time when they were at war, they cut production of munitions by 30%. Partially they captured so much from France, but this is what you got to get down for fatal mistake number 3. Germany not only cut production, they didn't fully mobilize for war until 1942. They're fighting a war, they literally called it a war of annihilation. And yet he never tried to gear the economy, and they never fully mobilized. The German economy was always fighting with one hand tied behind the back because they had incompetent Nazis in charge. And so, number 3 needs number 4, doesn't it? And while this is going on and Britain is fighting, he is telling his generals and cutting production, we're going to attack the largest country in the world. Operation Barbarossa. That's what they called the German attack on the Soviet Union. Barbarossa. Now, this is a mistake because Britain was still in the war, but also, look at a map. Russia, big. But look at it here. It's like a funnel. It goes like that. You need even more troops as you go on. It's a quagmire if you get caught there. They don't have the good roads. They don't have the infrastructure like France. Horses got to plod a long ways. And there's something else about Russia. It's cold. And so, on June 22nd, 1941, the second phase of the war, the most decisive, the most horrific war in American history, world history. We're on the periphery. Germany attacked the Soviet Union. Why on that day? Wait for the spring rains to end, but the longest day of the year. So think that a very short night to attack, but also look at the latitude. What latitude is Helen? Right here. That's how low Helen is. Isn't that weird to think about? Isn't that weird? So it's all way up there. Think how long that day is going to be. Think how short those days are. Think how cold those days are going to be. They thought they could win in 6 months. And so, I think I got it. It's amazing how much stuff we covered, and I have to skip things. Oh, did I mention Einsatzgruppe? Following the Germans into Poland and into the Soviet Union were special groups of SS called Einsatzgruppe who had one job: get rid of whom? Any undesirables. Jews, communist leaders, government leaders, teachers. Yeah. Hey, I want all of you to have a good weekend. I know weekends are tough. I feel your pain. Huh? I did. Okay. I thought I said it in the break. I do applaud. I was like, oh my gosh, I have to do this like to get that credit. But it was a great. I really thought it was. Yeah, it's a good movie. I thought it was really good. And yeah, that's when Warsaw. In fact, I did saw a picture of Warsaw after that battle Warsaw. The Germans, I mean, they were not famous. That's what I really thought it gave a good idea of like what the ghetto was like, especially. It's a well-done movie. The director is one horrific person, but Roman Polanski. Yeah, he had to flee the United States. If I read correctly, like there was some dispute, like legal battle afterwards. About him? About not him, but just like the I don't remember exactly what it was about, but I think like I can't pronounce his name very well. Who it was about? Yeah, I know. His family. Yeah, I remember that. I can't remember the detail, but I remember that, and they were upset because they took somebody else's sword. and not the families.
Yeah, like it was, and I just found out that afterwards.